The air inside the prison station was stale, thick with the sterile scent of recycled oxygen and the faint metallic tang of burning circuitry. The station orbited a dying red star, its jagged silhouette gleaming in the void, a fortress designed to hold the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. General marched down the dimly lit corridors, his heavy armored boots echoing against the cold steel. His elite honor guard flanked him, their reptilian features tight with unease. The tension was palpable, thick as the smoke curling from damaged panels overhead. Mandibles twitched in fury, his claws flexing as he approached the reinforced containment unit. Inside, sitting casually on a crude metacart, was the creature responsible for the station's unrest. Jackson Cole, a human. He lounged as if he were back on some lazy afternoon, his jumpsuit rolled down to his waist, arms resting behind his head in complete nonchalance. The energy bars separating him from the outside world flickered slightly, and for a moment, rage turned to a flicker of anxiety. Had the security field been tampered with? The thought sent an uncomfortable shiver through his spine back. You there imprison a mechanic. Voss was a guttural growl, his massive frame towering over the cell's entrance. His piercing yellow eyes locked onto the human, whose expression remained infuriatingly amused. Do you understand the insanity of what you've done? Jackson smirked, shifting slightly to sit up. He cracked his neck before responding, his tone light but laced with something dangerous beneath the surface. Oh yeah, real crazy move. Locking up the guy who fixed your engines before they exploded. Genius strategy, big guy. Van of guards stiffened, his clawed fingers tightening around his plasma rifle. The tension in the room was suffocating, but Jackson seemed to revel in it, his calm at odds with the storm of fury radiating from the warlord. Took a slow, deliberate step forward, his imposing presence nearly swallowing the entire space. You tampered with critical systems. Violated secure protocols. Your kind cannot be trusted. Jackson shrugged. I call it fixing. You guys call it tampering. But let's be real, if I hadn't stepped in, your ship would have turned into a very expensive pile of scrap matter. Hell, I probably saved your ugly mug in the process. Mandibles flared in barely restrained fury. You are reckless. Unpredictable. That is why your species is feared. Jackson exhaled sharply through his nose, shaking his head. No, we're feared because we survive. Because we build. Because we don't sit around waiting to die when something breaks. We fix it. He leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes locking onto, with an intensity that made even the guards shift uneasily. You threw me in here because you're scared. Not of what I broke, but because I understand how to put it back together. Clenched his fists, the sharp ridges of his exoskeleton catching the dim light. The human's words were infuriating because they were true. His people, the Dominion, had spent decades studying, had analyzed their unpredictable ingenuity, their relentless resilience. And now, face to face with Van in the heart of his own station, was beginning to feel the gnawing realization that they had made a mistake. Behind him, a distant rumble vibrated through the station, followed by the flicker of red emergency lights. Alarms blared, shrill and urgent. Jackson's smirk widened. Speaking of fixing things, you might wanna check your security grid. Turned sharply, his claws tightening into fists. He barked an order to his guards, who immediately brought up the security feeds on their wrist displays. Static flickered across the screens before revealing what had feed. Several containment doors were malfunctioning, some already breached. Prisoners were loose. Systems were failing. Turned back to the human, his mind racing. What have you done? Jackson leaned back again, stretching. Oh, nothing much. Just reprogrammed a couple subroutines while your guys were too busy glaring at me. You really should upgrade your firewall, by the way. He gestured lazily toward the chaos unfolding on the security feeds. Looks like you've got bigger problems than little old me. Rage threatened to consume him, but beneath the anger, a seed of something else had taken root, unease. This human, unarmed, locked behind reinforced energy barriers, had still managed to turn the station upside down with nothing more than his hands and his mind. And worst of all, he wasn't even trying. Stepped forward until the only thing separating them was the flickering energy barrier. His voice dropped to a dangerous growl. "You think this is a game?" Jackson's smirk didn't waver. He tilted his head slightly. "I think you're about to find out why it's a bad idea to put a human in a cage and expect them to stay there." The alarms screamed louder. The guards, previously confident and rigid, now looked uncertain, their tails twitching in nervous agitation. Claws flexed as he took one last look at the grinning human, then turned sharply toward his command console. The station was descending into chaos, and he had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. The command center of the prison station was in chaos. Red emergency lights pulsed overhead, casting long shadows across the meta walls as alarms blared through the corridors. Security officers scrambled at their stations, shouting updates over the din of failing systems. Stormed through the command deck, his massive form moving with deadly purpose. His mandibles clicked in frustration as he watched the security feeds flicker between static and brief glimpses of the unfolding catastrophe. Containment doors were failing across multiple sectors, and prisoners, some of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy, were already loose. The entire station was turning into a war zone. He spanned toward one of his officers, a lieutenant with shaking hands. "Status report, now." The officer swallowed hard, his crest flattened in fear. "Containment has failed in 4 wings so far. We've lost control of the lower decks," and he hesitated, glancing nervously at the main display screen. Eyes narrowed. "And what?" The officer clenched his jaw before finally answering. "And the human is gone." Silence fell over the command center, the only sound the wailing of alarms and the distant echo of explosions. Claws curled into fists, his rage barely contained. "Gone?" His voice was a deep, dangerous growl. "How?" The officer's hands shook as he pointed at the distorted security feed. "He must have overridden the energy barrier from inside. We don't know how, but he's loose, and heading toward the main engineering deck." Breath came slow and measured, his fury cold and controlled. "He's heading for the core." The realization sent a ripple of tension through the room. The core of the station controlled everything: power, life support, weapons systems. If the human reached it, the entire station would be at his mercy. Turned sharply, barking orders. "Deploy all remaining units to the engineering deck. I want that captured alive." The command deck erupted into motion, but deep down, had a gnawing feeling that it was already too late. Deep within the station, Jackson Cole moved through the corridors with practiced ease. The emergency lights flickered, casting jagged shadows against the walls, but he didn't slow. His boots barely made a sound as he sprinted through the industrial passageways, his mind working faster than his feet. Every vent, every access panel, every maintenance tunnel. He had memorized them all during his short time as the station's unwilling mechanic. He had been playing them, waiting for the right moment. Now, the moment had come. He slid to a stop at an intersection, his head tilting as he listened. Heavy boots. Armored footfalls. Soldiers were closing in fast. He exhaled, then ducked into a side panel, popping open the maintenance hatch with practiced speed. Slipping inside, he pulled the panel shut just as the guards stormed past. He was spotted near here, when of them snarled, their voices reverberating through the meta walls. "Find him before the general skins us all alive." Jackson smirked to himself, waiting until their footsteps faded before crawling deeper into the narrow maintenance shaft. They were panicking. Good. It meant he had the advantage. He moved quickly, navigating through the tangle of pipes and cables until he emerged near the main engineering deck. The entrance was heavily guarded, just as he expected. He crouched low behind a stack of cargo crates, assessing his options. The guards were, their plasma rifles glowing faintly in the dim light. He didn't have a weapon, but he didn't need one. He had something far more dangerous: knowledge. His fingers traced the console beside him, quickly accessing the emergency power junction. A few quick keystrokes and the overhead lights in the engineering bay flickered violently before plunging into darkness. Confused shouts rang out as the guards fumbled with their weapons, their glowing visors the only visible movement in the blackness. Jackson wasted no time. Moving swiftly, he closed the distance to the nearest guard and struck. His hand found the soldier's rifle, twisting it sharply while simultaneously driving his knee into the alien's gut. The guard collapsed with a choked gasp, his weapon falling into Jackson's waiting hands. The other soldiers barely had time to react before he was already moving. A burst of stolen plasma fire dropped two more, the energy rounds searing through their armor with ease. The remaining guards panicked, firing blindly into the dark, but Jackson was already gone, slipping between cover like a ghost. Within seconds, the bay was his. He took a steadying breath before sprinting toward the core chamber. The massive reinforced doors loomed before him, their locking mechanisms glowing a soft blue. He yanked open a side panel, quickly bypassing the security protocols. The doors hissed open just as another explosion rocked the station, sending debris cascading from the ceiling. He slipped inside, sealing the entrance behind him. The core chamber was a massive, pulsating engine of light and energy. Cables snaked across the floor like metallic vines, the hum of raw power vibrating through the air. Jackson approached the control terminal, his fingers flying across the interface. Within moments, the station's systems were at his fingertips. Voice crackled through the comms. "Human, stand down. You cannot win this fight." Jackson exhaled sharply, pressing the transmit button. "You sure about that, big guy?" Static filled the line before response came, slow and measured. "If you disable this station, you will die here too." Jackson grinned. "Yeah? Well, lucky for me, I'm not planning on dying today." With a final keystroke, he activated the core's override sequence. Systems across the station flickered wildly, alarms wailing in protest. Doors slammed shut, turrets deactivated, life support rerouted. The entire station was now under his control. He leaned back, cracking his knuckles as he muttered under his breath. "Let's see how you like being locked up for a change." Stormed through the ruined corridors of the prison station, his armored boots crushing the scattered debris beneath him. The facility was now in shambles. Lights flickered, walls were scorched with plasma buns, and bodies of fallen guards and prisoners alike lay strewn across the floor. He could hear the distant hum of failing power conduits, the occasional burst of static from the failing intercom system. Jackson Cole had done more damage in one night than an entire fleet of warships could in a month. The human had turned the station into a battlefield, using its very systems against them. Reached the entrance to the central core chamber, flanked by his remaining elite warriors, their weapons primed and ready. The massive blast doors had been locked down, barricaded from the inside. The human had taken complete control. Mandibles clicked in frustration as he activated the comms. "Jackson Cole, open this door. Now." His voice echoed through the ruined station, but the only response was static. He turned to his tech officer, a lean, reptilian with darting eyes. "Override the locks. Get me inside." The officer hesitated, glancing at the control panel, his scales darkening in unease. "Sir, the human has rewritten the access codes. He's using the station's own security against us." Let out a deep growl, his claws flexing. He was losing control, and he hated it. A sudden hiss of static crackled over the intercom, followed by the unmistakable voice of Jackson Cole. "You know, big guy, I really thought you were smarter than this. Still trying to break down the front door? Rookie mistake." Eyes narrowed. "You think you can win? You are win against all of us." Jackson's laugh was low and amused. "Funny. From where I'm sitting, it looks like I've already won." Clenched his fists, glancing at his warriors. He had to regain control of the situation. "What is it you want, human? Revenge? Freedom?" If it's the latter, we can negotiate. Silence followed for a long moment before Jackson spoke again, his tone colden this time. Negotiate? That's rich, coming from you. After all, I wasn't even supposed to be here. You grabbed me off a salvage run, threw me into a cage like an animal, and expected me to just roll over and fix your damn station. And now that I've turned the tables, you want to tuck. The intercom went silent again. Could hear the faint buzz of failing electronics in the background. Then Jackson's voice returned, more deliberate this time. Here's how this is gonna go. You and your goons are going to drop your weapons and evacuate the station. Leave the escape pods, leave the transport ships, and get the hell out. Let out a deep, rumbling laugh. You are not in a position to make demands, human. Jackson sighed. Man, I was hoping you'd say that. Suddenly, the floor beneath them trembled violently as a deep explosion rocked the station. Warriors staggered as sparks rained from the ceiling, warning sirens blaring through the halls. Calm crackled as his security chief's panicked voice came through. General, the station's system has been activated. Eyes widened. What? The officer's voice was frantic. He's locked us out of the controls. We have less than 15 minutes before the coordinates. Mandibles twitched in fury as he turned back to the locked blessed doors. Jackson Cole, he roared. You would doom yourself just to spite me. Jackson's voice came back, casual, almost amused. Oh, I'm getting out of here just fine. You, on the other hand, you might want to start running. Another explosion rattled the walls, this one closer. Emergency lights flashed, casting eerie red shadows as the station's AI droned. Coordination in 13 minutes. Warriors looked to him for orders, fear creeping into their expressions. Even the most hardened among them understood. If they didn't leave now, they were dead. Claws dug into his palms as he weighed his options. Pride demanded that he fight, that he break through the doors and rip the human apart with his bare hands. But the cold logic of survival told him that Jackson had already won. With a furious snarl, he turned on his heel. All units, fall back to the escape pods. Now! His warriors hesitated for only a second before following, their heavy footfalls echoing down the corridors. The countdown continued, the walls trembling with every passing second. As and his soldiers rushed through the failing station, escape pods began launching van by van, streaking toward the nearest neutral sector. From within the core chamber, Jackson watched it all unfold on the security feeds, a satisfied smirk on his face. He adjusted the stolen guard armor he had thrown over his jumpsuit and picked up a small, linking it to his hidden escape route. Aurora, he muttered, addressing the AI he had secretly embedded into the station's systems days ago. Prep the shutter. We're leaving. The AI's synthetic voice responded smoothly. Escape route calculated. Docking bay access granted. Countdown at 8 minutes. Jackson took a final glance at the screens, watching the last Syndicate escape pods disappear into the void. And that's checkmate, he whispered. He turned and bolted toward his exit, moving quickly through the crumbling station. As fire and debris rained from above, he sprinted into the docking bay where a sleek, stolen Syndicate transport awaited him. The engines were already primed, thrusters glowing a deep blue. He climbed into the cockpit, sealing the hatch behind him as the ship's systems powered up. The station trembled violently now, on the brink of total collapse. With a flick of a switch, Jackson fired the thrusters, the ship blasting out of the bay and into the cold void of space. Behind him, the prison station, a fortress, was now little more than a dying beast, its structure breaking apart in a chain of fiery explosions. Jackson leaned back in his seat, exhaling deeply as he watched the station's final movements. Then, with a small chuckle, he muttered to himself, "Imprison a mechanic? Yeah, that was your first mistake." The stolen Syndicate transport hurtled through the vast emptiness of space, its engines burning bright against the cold void. Inside the cockpit, Jackson Cole sat at the controls, his fingers moving across the console with practiced ease. His heart was still pounding from the adrenaline of his escape, but a slow smirk crept onto his face as he watched the wreckage of the prison station shrink in the distance. The fortress was now nothing more than a series of dying embers scattered across the stars. He leaned back, exhaling deeply, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. He had done it. He had beaten them. But it wasn't over yet. A flashing warning light on the console pulled his attention back to the present. The Syndicate wasn't the type to let a prisoner, especially a human, just waltz out of their facility without consequence. A quick scan of the ship's sensors confirmed his suspicions. Several Syndicate warships had begun moving in his direction, their energy signatures spiking as they accelerated. They were hunting him. He muttered a curse under his breath. His stolen ship had a decent head start, but it wouldn't last long against a full military pursuit. He needed an exit strategy, and fast. "All right, Aurora," he said, addressing the ship's onboard AI, the same one he had secretly embedded into the station's systems days before. "Give me options." The AI's synthetic voice responded smoothly, yet with a hint of urgency. "Multiple Syndicate vessels are locking onto our trajectory. Estimated time to intercept, 5 minutes. Scanning for viable escape routes." Jackson drummed his fingers against the console, his mind racing. "I need a jump point. Something close." The screen flickered as Aurora ran calculations, then highlighted a nearby system. A derelict asteroid field approximately 12 away contains an old mining station. It is no longer in operation, but its electromagnetic interference could provide a temporary hiding place. Jackson glanced at the tactical display. It wasn't perfect, but it was his best shot. "Set course. Engage maximum burn." The engines flared as the ship shot forward, pushing its limits to stay ahead of the pursuing warships. The distance between them shrank with every second. Alarms began to blare as missile lock indicators flashed red across the cockpit. "Incoming fire detected," Aurora warned. Jackson gritted his teeth, gripping the controls. Evasive maneuvers. He banked the ship hard to the left, twisting through the void as two missiles streaked past, detonating just out of range. The shockwave rattled the hull, but he was still in one piece. A second volley was already incoming, and this time, there was no room to dodge. "Deploy countermeasures," he barked. The ship's automated defenses activated, firing a spread of electronic decoys. The missiles veered, chasing the false signals before exploding harmlessly in the distance. Jackson let out a sharp breath. That was too damn close. The asteroid field loomed ahead now, jagged rocks and debris forming a chaotic, shifting maze. He didn't hesitate. He plunged the ship straight into the field, weaving between tumbling boulders as Syndicate fire rained down from behind. The larger warships hesitated at the entrance, unwilling to risk pursuit in such unstable conditions. Jackson grinned. "Cowards." He pushed deeper into the field, scanning for the abandoned mining station. The wreckage of old industrial platforms and rusting machinery drifted aimlessly, barely held together by what remained of their artificial gravity wells. Then he saw it, a dark, skeletal structure nestled within the field's densest cluster of debris. The old station was powered down, its docking bay doors, like the gaping maw of a beast. Jackson adjusted course, bringing the ship in slow. "Aurora, shut down all systems. We're going dark." The ship powered down, its lights flickering off as it drifted silently into the bay. The moment the ship settled inside, Jackson wasted no time. He grabbed a pulse rifle from the weapon rack and secured his gear. Just because the station looked abandoned didn't mean it was. He stepped out onto the cold, rusted metal of the docking platform, his footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. The air was stale, the remnants of a forgotten past lingering like ghosts in the dark. He moved cautiously through the station's corridors, his rifle at the ready. Broken control panels and shattered monitors lined the walls, flickering with the last dying embers of their systems. Aurora's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Syndicate patrol ships are scanning the asteroid field. They are attempting to track our position, but interference is limiting their sensor range. Jackson smirked. Good. Let's keep it that way. He reached the station's command center, brushing away the thick layer of dust covering the main console. He activated a manual override, bringing up the station's ancient power grid. The screens flickered to life, barely operational, but functional enough. Show me what we're working with. A crude schematic of the station appeared, highlighting a secondary power source deep within the lower levels. If he could reactivate it, he might be able to restore some basic systems, maybe even rig a distress signal. But before he could act, a distant sound made him freeze. A faint, rhythmic tapping, meta against meta. He turned sharply, raising his rifle. The station was supposed to be empty. He switched on his helmet's night vision, scanning the corridor ahead. The sound came again, closer this time. His grip tightened. Aurora, tell me I'm alone in here. The AI hesitated before responding, detecting anomalous movement patterns within the station. Unknown life signs approaching. Jackson exhaled slowly. Of course. Because things weren't bad enough already. He took a step forward, his boots making almost no sound against the floor. The tapping grew louder, and then it stopped. Silence pressed in around him like a suffocating force. Then, from the darkness ahead, two glowing eyes flickered to life, staring at him from the shadows. A low, unnatural growl echoed through the corridor. Jackson swore under his breath. You've got to be kidding me.